You know the guy that interviews young Dana in that classic UFC video? That was me. And I was also the executive running the show when the Fertittas bought it. Let's talk old school UFC and MMA current events on Wormy's Wisdom, here on the Todd Atkins MMA Podcast Network.
All right, this is Todd Atkins, and I'm back with James Werme, another Wermy's Wisdom. And today we're going to kind of talk about a subject that I've been seeing a lot of online, especially YouTube type opinion people, talking about how they think that Dana White is basically checked out and that he's kind of just going through the motions of promoting the UFC at this point. And James being a guy who was an executive producer with SEG and Zuffa for a period of time and basically ran shows. And so I'm going to kind of let him give his take because he doesn't exactly go along with what people are thinking on this subject. So James, I'll kind of let you kind of give an intro to this topic.
Sure, and thanks for having me again, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so as Todd said, my name is James Wormy. I was an executive with the UFC from 1995 to 2002. Ran the show from 98 to 2001. Was also an announcer on the show during that time and was the lead executive and the only employee to go with the show from New York to Las Vegas when Dana and Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta purchased it in 2001 and spent the year with Zuffa as the vice president of production. So yeah, I know the players a little bit, and I've been seeing some of the frustration online. What I would say is that a general statement that Dana White has been shepherding the UFC and mixed martial arts for 25 years. He's done a fantastic job. The success speaks for itself. And I'm amazed that he is still doing it and still doing it at the level he's doing it with the work ethic and energy that he does it. He's the face, he's the mouthpiece, he's the image, he's the everything to the UFC and maybe MMA in general. So obviously pulled in 1,000 different directions and many balls in the air, whether it's fighters, show, TV, fans, shareholders, partners, bosses, etc. So a lot going on, and you know, can I fault him or be critical of him if he seems to be stepping back a little bit? I don't think so because hey, that's life and that's natural. And maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. It's probably a good thing for companies to bring in new people and to delegate in general, right? To start to use some of the people around you so that you can tend to things. I will say one thing that I am positive, and I only know this from my experience with the show and my experience with Dana, that I believe that every major decision involving the UFC still goes through him. So say what you want about him not being as visible or not being as accessible, but the decisions, I am sure, are still his. So we can take it from there.
Now, talk a little bit about when an entity like the UFC goes to where it's become a kind of like a corporate entity with shareholders and stuff. Well, as we were talking about when you were there, the fans are more the boss. They were always trying to get the next good fighter. If somebody had a reputation, they were trying to get that person into the show. They were
Yeah.
trying to make the best matches they could make. So, what has changed now from your vantage point?
Well, I'm not certainly not in a position to say they're not trying to make the best matches possible. And I'm not close enough to offer a real educated opinion. What I can do is get some insight and commentary about, doing shows and running a fight show, and that environment as a whole. Um, you know, Things are different now, and talent is different now, and the number of shows is different now, and the corporate structure of the UFC is very different now. Back in the day, our masters were the fans, and we took it very seriously to try to keep them with us. But we also had to serve athletic commissions and politicians and cable executives. So there are always masters to serve. And especially when you're a public company, suddenly the shareholders become the main people that you're looking to keep happy. And how do you keep shareholders happy? Well, you keep the stock price going up. So you could argue that there's a conflict of interest there, but if great shows and great fights equals great business, well, then those goals are aligned. So I think that it can be challenging, but it doesn't need to be. Cost cutting and finances is also a huge part of this, and how they want to handle their books and handle their expenses and all that is up to them. So many factors go into this, and you know the fans, you love them and they're hardcore, and they're the ones that got you where you are, but you can't please everyone, and I know this firsthand. You can't please everyone, and you do your best, and you try to make the best matches and the most entertaining shows and the best fights, because that's what everyone wants. Don't forget, Dana's a fight fan. He doesn't want duds on his card. Um, all you can do is set the table. All you can do is put your team on the field. The execution, the performance, fighting your ass off. Ultimately, that's up to the fighters. So.
Yeah, but I think you see a lot of YouTube people saying, okay, this is how you fix the UFC. They need to do this and this and this. They're not really looking at it from a standpoint of an entity that has to answer to shareholders. They're just looking at it from, this is what I want and this is how it should be, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not
Well,
realistic.
right. It's usually not realistic, and fans' opinions and desires are going to vary from fan to fan. What you got to do in this type of situation is have a plan and have a structure and have a progression and have a momentum, and feed quality opponents to your champions, and build future champions. Armchair matchmaking is no different than armchair quarterbacking. Who's to say who's going to be right or who's going to be wrong the next day? But the reality is the UFC is putting out a ton of programming. So if you're an MMA fan, if you're a UFC fan, you've got to be happy with that. You've got it on, multiple platforms. You can tune on ESPN and watch the UFC, which is it's still an incredible thing for me to see. And not to mention all the streaming stuff and Dana's series and the pay-per-views. So, you know, you can't please everyone. All you can do is try to deliver the best product possible that pleases the fans and pleases the shareholders, right? And does great gates and does great buy rates and does great ratings. You try to keep the train rolling in the best direction possible.
Like the people who say you need to cut down the amount of shows. Can you explain why that wouldn't work with the shareholders most likely?
Well, they are used to a certain amount of revenue, right? Revenues are driven primarily by the shows. And when you get into complicated TV deals like the UFC is getting involved in now and has been involved in for the past several years, those networks are going to require a certain amount of shows. And the UFC has proven that they can do a certain amount of shows. So I don't think you're going to see the number of shows decrease. Although that would probably firm up the talent pool, and you get uh, more anticipation and more build to your big fights. But I just don't think in the current TKO, UFC, publicly traded company situation, I don't think you're going to see it because they want to maximize profits. So the best way to maximize profits is to do as many shows as you can.
Now, let me ask you this as someone who's, like I said, done shows and done shows at the UFC. If you were in a position that Dana, I mean, I guess the end goal for everyone is to get to a point where you're working for shareholders, although it can be a pain, you know. Is it almost like a necessary evil at that point?
Oh, I would say it's more of a double-edged sword, and be careful what you wish for, because we'll take the UFC as the example, right? You have Dana and the Fertittas running things their way, making the decisions they want to make without having to answer to anyone. Well, suddenly, you're a part of a larger conglomerate, you're publicly traded. Suddenly you have bosses or at least partners and at least shareholders that you have to answer to. So suddenly you have to answer to people and you have to justify your decisions, which is different for a lot of owners, a lot of people that end up taking their companies public. I would say probably as many regret it as enjoy it, because you do lose a certain amount of control. And if you've spent the last X amount of years doing things the way you want and not having to explain yourself or answer to anyone, well, it's a different deal when you're in this type of situation. So, I guess it's everyone's dream to go public and make a bag of cash, but suddenly you have to answer to a board, right? Who can probably replace you if they don't like your decisions. That's the other thing, is you're not necessarily in charge.
Yeah, I wonder if Dana's contract, though, because he was the one who stayed on. I wonder if there was something in there relative to that.
I would assume so. I would hope so because he's the biggest star, the most recognizable star, the most public figure that they have. So they need him, and he provides a very valuable service beyond the conference room, beyond the office. As a presence on television, on social media, on his series. Wherever it is, Dana has become the ambassador, the shepherd of UFC and mixed martial arts. So they need him. So I would assume they've got him locked up. I would.
No, what I mean is to where, yeah, maybe I have to answer a little bit, but not as much as
Oh,
other people
well,
might have to.
I mean, who knows? And that situation might be black and white or it might be gray. But that's all well and good until the stock starts to go down. And then it really doesn't matter who you are, probably. You're going to find yourself answering questions, answering hard questions, and maybe having to acquiesce or give in or do something that make decisions that you wouldn't necessarily make if you had all the control. So certainly the possibility is there. He's got bosses, he's got shareholders, he's got a board, and that's different when you're used to running the show top to bottom with an
Now, this,
iron fist.
oh, sorry. This might be a hard question to answer. Why do you think Lorenzo got out and when Dana didn't?
Hmm. That's an excellent question, and I've asked myself that. Probably, they had owned the show, what, 15 years when they got out, so it's not like they were there a short amount of time. I think they accomplished every goal that they set for themselves in the UFC, and I think someone threw a number at them that they just could not ignore. Um, and them being the majority owners, I don't know what Dana's ownership stake was at the time. It was certainly not the same as Lorenzo and Frank, so he wasn't going to get the payout like they were going to get. And he loves it. The fact that he's still doing it, um, he bleeds for the UFC. And say what you want about checking out and not showing up and this and that, but there's no one that works harder than Dana White. There's no one that this success can be attributed to more than Dana White. So I can see him just wanting to stay on to be a part of the game and make sure that things kept going the way they wanted it to go. But if you're Lorenzo and Frank, maybe it's time to just cash out and sit back and be happy about the investment you made and the work that you did and the global domination that you oversaw, which was their goal from the start.
But I mean, do you think there is any discussion amongst them? Hey, maybe you can walk too. We're out. Maybe you want to go too. Or do you not think that discussion was ever?
I mean, maybe, I'm sure it came up and I'm sure they all, took each other's temperature about it. And I'm sure they all made the decision that they wanted to. The brothers tended to agree on everything. So I can certainly see them stepping away together. But I don't know. The other thing is that sale, one of the conditions of that sale may have been that Dana stays for X amount of years more because he brings that much to the table as the spokesperson and face of the organization. So you certainly want to lock up your key employee, and he's a key employee. So
You know,
maybe they made an offer to Lorenzo and Frank, money wise, that they couldn't ignore, and maybe they made an offer to Dana employment wise, that he couldn't either.
you just said something interesting. The brothers tend to agree. From your, because not a lot of people talk about Lorenzo and Frank. You worked with them. What can you say about working with them?
I enjoyed my time with Lorenzo and Frank. I thought they were both good guys. Lorenzo was much warmer and easier to get along with than Frank. Frank was kind of an intimidating kind of guy. He was older, and he was a big shot. He was a Las Vegas. The whole family were big shots, but um, Frank was kind of an intense dude. That doesn't mean he wasn't cool and fun, and we had plenty of great times, and had plenty of beers together and good times and laughs together. But when Frank got serious, everyone everyone stood up straight. So, Frank was kind of respected as the elder and the wise man, but he was on the mat rolling with Dana and Lorenzo and John Lewis and Tito back in the day. So he was game for anything. Interesting thing about the brothers, their upbringing was different. Um, Frank went right into the casino business. Frank had held like every job at the station casinos by the time he was made president, CEO of station. Frank was a dealer and Frank was a pit boss, and Frank had gone through the ranks of the Vegas casino life. And Lorenzo was the younger brother, and he was a little bit different. Lorenzo, he went to school, I believe, in San Diego, and then he went to business school at NYU. And then he joined the company. So it was, two different routes to get to the same place, but their office at station was connected. They had a door in between their office that was always open, and one desk could see the other desk. So I think Frank at the time was CEO, and maybe Lorenzo was president, but they get along very well. They spent a lot of time together. Anytime we traveled, both of the brothers were there. And like I said, they were up for anything. Frank did all the trips. When we all went to Tokyo, when we used to go to LA for stuff, or we went to Laguna for the retreat, they were always around. So in general, really nice, really cool guys. They were very good to me. I always like to point out how well they treated me in bringing me over as a new employee to a new organization. So we had a lot of good times. It didn't end well, but that was as much my fault as theirs. And yeah, I look back on the year I spent with them with fondness and good memories.
You lived at Station for a while, right?
I did. I spent my first 3 months in Las Vegas. I lived at the Palace Station on the 18th floor in a junior suite at the end of the hallway. Yeah, they put me up in a really nice spot. Um, I lived in the property. I could eat at any of the restaurants free of charge. They gave me a rental car for I think it was 3 months in the hotel, 3 months of the rental, and then I got my own place. But yeah, it was right down the street from the Fertitta Enterprises building, which is where the original UFC office was. I believe it was on Sahara. So yeah, yeah. I mean, those guys are cool. Those guys are cool.
Could you have stayed longer there if you wanted to, or was there a certain time period where they expected you to?
Yeah, I think 90 days was my out. I don't know if it was in writing, but it was expressed to me that, and then I thought that was plenty of time. And I was traveling a lot at that time, so I wasn't around a lot, but it was a really comfortable way to ease into Las Vegas. And yeah, I had everything I needed. And they were right downstairs because the casino the station offices were in the Palace Station. I think that was the original property. So we had a lot of lunches and hung a lot. And those guys weren't around all day, every day. What they were around in the mornings and then after work. Like, so we would do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We had 8 a.m. staff meetings, and Lorenzo and Frank were usually there. At least Lorenzo and usually Frank most of the time. So I would see them then. And then after they had finished at station, they would come over to the Fertitta Enterprises building, and I would see them after work because the basement floor of Fertitta Enterprises building had a great fight gym in it that we all used to work out in. So after work, we would all usually be down there working out, and then we'd go upstairs and we'd chat about whatever was happening or things we needed to discuss. But yeah, they were as involved as they could be while having very important day jobs. But they never they never shied away from discussion, decisions. They were very much into it, and I could always count on them. If I needed anything from them, I could count on them for sure.
Do you have any interesting stories about certain decisions or something that was memorable?
Um, Kind of the memorable thing about that is I was starting to get cut out of the decisions a little bit, which was disappointing and frustrating because they leaned on Joe Silva a lot. Obviously, the most interesting and important things to those guys were the fighters and strategies involving the fighters. And they really leaned on Joe as an experienced voice, although Joe had never been a matchmaker officially. He was a consultant with SEG for many years, but he had never made matches or made decisions regarding the show. But Joe had a way of expressing his opinion. Sometimes, in an effort to express his opinion, he might belittle yours. So he could be difficult and in some ways a little intimidating, especially if you might be new to the job and you didn't know these guys as well as he did, or maybe you didn't know the fight game or MMA as well as he did, or at least he made you feel that way. So yeah, I mean, we would talk about everything. We talked about, Lorenzo was a real hands-on guy. He would love to talk about graphics and music and writing, and he was always interested in some of the creative stuff I was doing. But a lot of the fight stuff wound up going into Dana's office, and Joe was constantly in Dana's office. So yeah, that was a bit of frustration during that year, is I got a little bit cut out of those discussions and those decisions.
Now let's kind of pivot back to when people are saying maybe Dana's checked out. Can you kind of tell them the undertaking that it is to run a show like this? Like you said, you got pretty
Yeah.
burned after 7 shows of having to do it.
Yeah, I was toast after 7 years. He's been doing it for
Yeah,
25.
7.
So kudos to him. And it's a grind. And running a company like that, it, 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 it was a big deal when I was there. And now it's 100 times what it was. So it's a Herculean effort. And, I maybe the best way to describe it is like picture a three-headed monster, right? Because the UFC is a three-headed monster. You have the fight game, you have live television, and you have a live event, an arena experience. And all three of those things require tons of balls in the air, tons of advanced planning, tons of preparation. And oh, by the way, anything could change at any moment. So, yeah, doing shows is tough. And lining up a card is tough. And then getting that card actually to air that night is tough. You're talking about 16, 18, 20 guys, depending upon how many fights you have, that have to go through training camp and not get hurt and not get sick and make weight. That's just on the fighter side. TV is a whole other animal, and it's live TV, so it's even more of an animal. Um, Lights, cameras, action, trucks, generators, uplinks, satellites. It's endless. It's an endless list, and there's dozens of people working on that to make it happen. The third piece would be the live event, right? This is an in-arena experience. 16, 18, 20,000 people. You've got to handle everything that goes along with the building, the promotion, the marketing, the ticketing, and then create an environment that's entertaining. You've hopefully done your job with the fighters. You've hopefully done your job to create an entertaining television event. Now you got to entertain the people that are in the seats, paying for tickets. So you've got three big things going on. And in my day, we just had those things going on every other month, and it seemed like a big deal. Now Now it's every week. So obviously you staff up and you get good, and repetition breeds habit and success and conditioning. So obviously you get the train rolling, and at a certain point it can go on its own. But someone has to be there to make the tough decisions. Someone has to be in the truck calling cameras and replays, and someone has to be in the arena making sure that everything is dialed in and timed correctly so that it's not only a great fight, it's not only an entertaining television show, it's also a great live event to be at. So tons of balls in the air, thousands of details. And that's why I say, like, delegation becomes a big thing. Back in my day, the staff was very small. But the show load was also very small compared to now. And I'll assume that the UFC, I don't know how many employees they have. I'm going to assume it's in the hundreds because it needs to be, because of all the work that needs to be done. We talk about the live show. Well, when the live show is over, usually those shows have another life, whether it's taped or rebroadcasted or streamed or whatever. So there's a whole post-production world that has to happen. And while this is all happening, you're planning the next show and the next show. So it's a never-ending cycle of balls in the air and details and a new town and how we get in there and who's on the card and do we have all the gear and have we hired all the freelancers and is the building lined up and how's the ticketing and is the octagon going to be able to fit? And how's the seating around the thing? Is everyone going to be able to see? So lots of stuff going on. That's why I say it's a real big job. And for anyone to complain about, oh, he only stays at the press conference half the time, or he didn't show up for this or that, the guy in charge is getting pulled in 1,000 different directions. Dana is a worldwide personality, not only in the sports world, but now, in the political world and pop culture as a whole. So I can't imagine how many directions he's being pulled in, and I would assume that it's perfectly natural for him to start to delegate. Makes perfect sense, and you want to do that because he's not going to be around forever, and you want to trust the people that you've trained and the people that you have under you to take on a certain amount of responsibility for the show.
Now I kind of want to pivot to BJ Penn. Uh, I had to kind of fill you in on some of this, but it seems like he's kind of really getting way out there. As far as like,
Yeah, it's sad. When I knew BJ, he was a kid, fun-loving kid. We had many smoke sessions in my hotel room with him and the Hilo boys, and great stories and great times and a lot of laughs. So it's sad to see him going in this direction, and I'm certainly not qualified to diagnose what's happening, but it does not seem good. I'm not so close to it, but I do see the headlines, and it seems like there's been a steady decline into something.
yeah, where he's kind of saying his family's been, like executed, and now there's other people playing them. Just some really crazy stuff to be saying, and
Yeah, I mean,
and even like I've seen him sharing videos of himself arguing with his mom over, you know, the estate and all stuff. I would be embarrassed to show myself if I
yeah,
had those
yeah.
kind of conversations.
I mean, head trauma is real, and the effects of it are real, and maybe that's what we're seeing. Um, you know, CTE comes to mind, and causing people to do things that they would not have normally done and act outside of their normal personality. I don't know, but what I've seen is troubling. And like I said, it's sad for me because I knew him at a different time, and it seems like he was a completely different person and a good time guy and a kick-ass fighter. Nobody brought it like BJ. Great, he gave us some great fights back in the day. And like I said, we hung out a lot. He was a young guy, I was a young guy. He was new to the show, and so yeah, we got along great. And it's sad for me to see all of this.
I mean, it seems like his mom. I guess she filed some sort of like a 6 month restraining order. I think they were living together, and she wants him to get some treatment. I don't even know if you could force that upon him or that the government could force that upon him. But
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It is sad. It is sad. It's a tough scene.
do you feel like, I mean, it's not necessarily the UFC's responsibility, but you think they should maybe try to intervene somewhat?
No, no. Um, you know, well, okay. So one side of it is that's his business and he's an adult and he can do what he wants as long as he's not hurting anyone. Okay. The flip side of that is he's a friend to the organization. So we want to reach out and help that guy. But I don't know. At a certain point, and I'm nowhere near close enough to really make a qualified opinion on this, but once someone starts to go down this type of road, I don't know that you can help them.
Yeah. I mean, I would have some concern in that, UFC has UFC gyms with his name on them.
Oh,
I think
I
like
didn't.
three or four. You
Oh,
know,
well, okay, that's
two
different.
on Oahu, I know because I trained at one of them for a period of time.
Uh-huh.
I think there's two or three on Oahu and maybe one on the Big Island as well, where he lives.
Well, this is a perfect situation where if it's a private company, then the management can do whatever they want and say, hey, he's part of the family. He may be going off the deep end a little bit, but you know what? He's part of the family versus a publicly traded company that's going to say, that guy's bad for this. That guy's given us bad PR. We do not want the association pull his name off the sign. So, that's a perfect example of one versus the other. I don't know what the right thing is to do. I just feel bad in general, that it has gotten to this, and hopefully, he gets help and it doesn't get worse. But yeah, I think you got to lean on, the people that are close to him now. And I don't know when the last time he fought in the UFC or if he's even still close to those guys. Although if he has a business relationship with them, then there must be a certain amount of friendship still there, or at least business relationship. But yeah, this is a tough one. When these types of things happen, and this is odd. I never seen anything like this happen. Usually you see the effects of combat sports in a different way. And guys, get a little punchy and stuff like that. But this feels different. Feels a little different.
Yeah, and I don't see his brothers on his social media. He was very close to those guys,
Yeah.
and I don't see them on there. I don't see them sticking up for him. I don't see pictures with him in there. There
Well,
must
that
have been
could
some separation between.
yeah, that could be a sign. I know his brother JD was his manager for a very long time, and they were tight. And although all the Hilo boys were real tight, real tight. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I wish him the best. Um, but I don't, I feel bad. Uh, Sad. Seems like a sad situation, and you hope that it'll get better, but it seems to be getting worse, right?
Now, what was he like when you met him? Maybe on a
He
brighter
was
note, maybe a more positive note. But
he was awesome. He was fun, and he laughed a lot, always a smile, and storyteller. And like I said, we used to smoke grass together. We used to hang out a lot. That whole crew used to come and hang out in my hotel room uh, after the show or leading up to it, depending upon who he was fighting. But also, BJ at the time he entered was very, very highly touted because of all the BJJ, all his jiu-jitsu accolades coming in. So he was a lot of fanfare for BJ coming in. I didn't know a lot about him. So he was an exciting young fighter who came in and didn't disappoint. I remember, I don't know if it was his second fight where we did like a fan thing where you vote on the main event. It was one of those early Dana, get the fan, payback to the fans, a little bit of reward to the fans, get them more involved and interactive kind of deal. And and he was a relative unknown, and they voted him to fight, just before the main event. I think that's the fight they were voting on, is who was going to lead into the main event, and they wanted to see BJ. I think it was BJ versus Dean
mm-hmm.
Thomas, which was an awesome knee to the head, Dean going back, seeing stars. BJ getting so fired up that he like jumped over the thing and ran back to the ran back to the dressing room. We had to go get him and bring him back so I could interview him. And he was just a mile a minute ball of energy, as intense as he was fun and cool. He could turn it on. He could get mean. You know, BJ liked to throw the leather and bang. He didn't mind mixing it up, but he also did incredible things on the ground. And I remember, I forget who he was fighting, but there was a position he had himself in where he was like hanging on the guys, and the guy was standing up, and he's got almost like a triangle around the guy's leg, and he's suspending himself on the guy's leg and throwing punches up. You know, he did a lot of things that we hadn't seen a small guy like that do, and he brought a lot of energy to the octagon, and looked, you know, he looked really, really strong. And I think he was undefeated going into the Pulver fight when he fought Jens, I believe at 35. That was my last show, which was not an exciting fight. And sometimes that happens, especially when belts are on the line. Guys come in a little bit more tentative. But when he burst on the scene, you know, he let it all hang out, and we loved that, and the fans loved that, and a lot of skills and a lot of energy, and yeah, real exciting smaller guy for us. Had a lot of great times with BJ and his crew.
Maybe I'll ask you one more thing. Like, um, what was it like going from New York to Vegas? From
You ever
the
been in New York? You ever
from
been in
the
Vegas?
Bob Merowitz to the Fertitta.
It was very, very different. Um, for many reasons. All right. Obviously, New York is a different vibe than Vegas. And the SEG office was a different vibe from the Zuffa office. And the Zuffa office was just, you know, finding its legs. So they were molding their personality. You know, Bob was from the music business, and all the original executives were from music and comedy. So it was pretty laid back. And you know, Bob used to smoke cigars. A bunch of the guys, the bosses, used to smoke cigars in the office. And we used to get in at 10. The music business in New York opens at 10 a.m. Because everyone goes out at night. So it's later hours. When I got to Vegas, it had more of a punch in, punch out feel to it. It wasn't as much, it wasn't as loose, as much as cool and as loose. And obviously, you know, this was a new operation. Dana was trying to establish himself and their protocol and their procedure. And you know, at the same time, they were in the learning curve. So, you know, not only was, you know, in the New York office, we had been doing it for years, and Bob trusted me to do it for him. And it wasn't that way. You know, I don't want to say that Dana micromanaged, but he wanted to know about everything because he was still learning about everything. So, you know, you're going from obviously New York, East Coast, Vegas, kind of West Coast, you know, major metropolis to, you know, the casino town in the desert, established business people who have running this thing for years to, you know, in many ways a startup with new executives who had never done this before. So it was a little frustrating, and it was a little difficult. And um, yeah, you know, and on a personal level, I went from making every major decision to not making any major decisions. You know, I went from deciding what we were going to do to being told what they wanted me to do. So, and you know, I'm taking orders from Dana, who had never done this before, and Joe Silva, who had been an outside consultant. So, you know, in that sense, you know, I often wished that Lorenzo and maybe Frank were more involved in those days because I felt like I felt like Lorenzo was easier to talk to, and we kind of spoke the same language. Um, Even though, you know, Dana's a Boston guy, I'm a Boston guy, but we did not have similar backgrounds, and obviously he had been managing Chuck and Tito, so he was familiar with the event from that angle, um, but not necessarily from an executive producer, president of the company. angle. So yeah, it was a little frustrating.
What is
I could have handled it a lot better. Also, it should be said.
what part of Boston are you from? I'm kind of curious. Tell me about that first. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm actually from Worcester, Massachusetts, which is about an hour west of Boston. I went to college in Boston. I went to BC, but I grew up in Massachusetts, and then after college, I moved to New York and lived there for 10 years before I moved to Vegas. So I'm an East Coast guy.
Yeah, it seems like Boston has a lot of influence in like entertainment and now in combat sports, just because of the UFC. It seems almost like they kind of gravitate towards each other. Some of these Bostonians that
Are you calling me a masshole?
No, I
No,
mean
I don't know. I
Like
don't.
Dana having his interest in promoting Irish fighters like Connor and this guy, what's his name, Callum Walsh, that he's promoting in boxing.
Uh-huh. And Patty, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I would assume that comes from the Boston
Yeah, well, I think
background.
anyone that grows up in the Northeast, especially from if you're from Boston or Massachusetts, you take a lot of pride in that. Um, I certainly do, and I know that he does as well. So, and Boston, New York, New Haven, there's tough towns in the Northeast as well, with checkered pasts and colorful histories. So maybe that plays into it as well. There's also, a lot of the finest academic institutions are in the Northeast, so there's certainly pride taken with that as well. But yeah, I mean, Dana's a Boston guy. Obviously, he's tight with, Wahlberg is a Boston guy. So yeah, we never forget where we're from. Um, and we take a great amount of pride in being from there. And like I said, I'm from Worcester, which is an hour away, but it's the same vibe.
Actually, where I live has some ties to this whole Dana White, Whitey Bulger. Because one of the hits they did was in Tulsa.
Oh wow.
Roger
Oh, okay.
Wheeler, if you
Okay.
remember, he owned the High Ally,
Yeah.
that sport that they were trying to get in on.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh, was that the
him,
one that they got him with at his Cadillac when he was like coming
yes,
out of the
yes,
country club or something? I remember
yeah, he
that
was at
scene.
Tulsa Hills Country Club, and yeah, that's where that
Yeah,
happened.
well, that stuff was real. I remember the headlines in the papers growing up. The Providence, Boston. I forgot Providence in there. Providence would probably be the more notorious. Some people, maybe people don't know that, but Providence is where a lot of that comes from. So Providence, Boston, Worcester, those areas, yeah, they're all kind of intertwined. Um, so yeah.
You know, what we're kind of getting onto this topic a little bit. I'll talk about, like I watched The Town. What do you know about like Charlestown back then?
Not much. I mean, I know Boston because I grew up close to there as a kid and I went to college there. But um,
Did you
yeah,
watch the movie The Town?
yeah, I love that movie. I love that movie. It's great. I just love hearing the Massachusetts accents on the
Yeah.
big screen and to see who can get it right and who can't. Um, but yeah, I mean, obviously, Affleck, Damon, Wahlberg, those guys are legit. They're from Massachusetts, um, so it's fun to see them doing stories about back home and portraying it in good ways or interesting ways or entertaining ways. But I love that movie. Yeah, I think that's a great movie. I mean, I don't know any bank robbers. I'm not really involved in any type of underworld or criminal acts or organizations, but they exist. That's for sure.
Yeah, I thought Jeremy Renner was good in it too.
Yeah, he was great. He was
Yeah.
great. The whole cast was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the fact that it took place at, the final heist was at Fenway is awesome.
I think, I kind of watched some YouTube videos about the area, and apparently, like, there was a prison there.
Hmm.
So they were saying a lot of prisoners got out and settled in that area.
In Charleston, yeah,
So that's why this kind of, so
yeah.
many of them were from that location.
The only time I went into those places like was for high school football or high school sports when we would play the Boston teams and we would go into those neighborhoods. But I didn't hang out much in those neighborhoods. I was a Central Mass guy, so Worcester and surrounding areas. Even when I was in college, Boston College is kind of on the outskirts of the city, so we didn't spend too much time downtown.
But were those places known as areas maybe not to go if you didn't need to
Yeah,
at that time?
yes, yes, yes. No, this Boston is just like any other major city where there's places you safe and places you don't. Um, yeah, and especially if you go back to the 70s, um, there was a lot of racial strife in the Boston area. That's well documented. And so, yeah, colorful history, in many ways, checkered past at times, but a great place to grow up. And I still have family there today. So, I'm proud of where I'm from, and I love to go back home whenever I do. And I usually hit Cape Cod for a week every summer. Um, so yeah, it's good to go home.
Well, James, like I said, I always appreciate you coming on and kind of giving your insight to these kind of topics because it's difficult to, not everyone can, there's not a lot of people that can do it,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
have been
no problem.
involved in.
What's people's main beef about Dana, and why do they think he's stepping away?
I don't know if they think he's stepping away, but I think a lot of people feel like he's taking a lot of things on. He's got this power slap thing going.
Mm,
He's got he was going to do the Canelo Crawford thing. I guess I don't know what happened with that, but apparently
yeah.
he's not going to be the. I don't know
I
if he's
mean,
not going to be involved at all, but he was going to be like the head promoter of that
yeah, I
fight.
mean, related offshoots are also not surprising to me because everything he seems to be branching out into is you could argue it's an extension of the UFC, or at least it's an extension of his personality, or it's on brand for what he's been doing the last 2 decades. So, a lot of people that like to hunt also like to fish. So, if he wants to listen, they have the facility, they shoot the power slap in the Apex, right?
Right.
So you got the facility, let's put another event in here. um, and he's always been a boxing fan, since he was a kid, he was a boxing fan. And we used to talk boxing. We used to go to the big fights when they came to Vegas. So, that doesn't surprise me at all. They tried to do Zuffa boxing many years ago. So that's always kind of been in the back of their heads. And I'm really surprised that that didn't take off because Lorenzo and Frank were into that as well. Um, but maybe it just didn't seem worth it. Boxing can get very messy when you get into the different promotions and promoters and sanctioning bodies, and it's a lot messier than the UFC for sure, and MMA.
And they couldn't
Um,
monopolize it in that way either,
yeah, but I mean,
which I think
it's
probably
been
something that.
it's been 25 years, and he's been the face and the mouth. So, people get tired, but I would never say that he's not into it. You can criticize what you want, but I think it's unfair to say that he's not into it or he's not trying to look out for the show in the best way possible and take care of the fans in the best way possible. Things evolve, things change. The corporate structure certainly has changed. The amount of shows has changed. The TV partners have changed. So you're going to get change. At the end of the day, you just want two guys or girls to get in the octagon and fight their ass off. So hopefully that stays the same.
And also, I think they feel like it's very cookie cutter. No fights are really getting that kind of promotion that makes it feel like it's an important fight. Even if it
Again,
is, it's all this is how we do it. So we do it here, 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 next, next,
mm,
next, next, next.
yeah, you got to have process. And with this many shows, it's tough to build a lot of anticipation.
Right.
And stars have to stars have to emerge. You can only do so much as the promoter and the producer. You can only do so much to make someone seem all these things. It's up to them to get in there and prove it in competition and hopefully transcend and gain interest beyond the hardcores or crossover. It doesn't happen very often in any sport. It's hard. It's hard to do. And the athletes, we've talked about this. The pool of athletes is so much bigger and so much better. And you no longer have the jujitsu guy versus the kickboxer. It's always a mixed martial artist versus a mixed martial artist. So you're going in at a certain level playing field to start. So a lot of the potential unpredictability or excitement, it may be there and it may not.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. As people like us have been around from the beginning, there was some awe to those early events because it really was like we don't know what's going to happen. Is someone going to get killed?
Dude, there's
Yeah,
nothing more exciting when back in the day when the octagon doors shut and you had this person from this discipline, this person from this discipline, the excitement and the nervous energy and being in those arenas was wild, and you felt like anything could happen, and sometimes it did.
yeah,
But those times have, I think, changed. I think that's a bygone past.
yeah. Well, like I always say, James, it's always great to get your insight on these topics, and people, check out James. Let them know where that you can find you on social media.
Yep, it's on Twitter, on X. It's at James A. Werme, JamesAWerme, and on Instagram, it's Werme James, WermeJames. And
Yeah,
thank you, Todd, for having me. Appreciate
yeah.
it. Always
Subscribe
enjoy
to
the
his
chats.
social media and ask him some questions if you want. I mean, that's how I got to him. He's welcome to answer. He didn't know who I was.
Happy to
But
engage. Always willing to talk old school UFC. Always willing to talk old school UFC, baby.
yeah, I feel like it's a real, privilege to have you on these
It's my
shows.
pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
And everybody checking out the shows, appreciate the support. Make sure to like and subscribe. And until the next episode, take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Wormy's Wisdom, where we talk old school UFC and MMA current events. I'm James Werme, UFC executive, announcer, and producer of over 40 events worldwide during the SEG and Zuffa years. Wormy's Wisdom, here on the Todd Atkins MMA Podcast Network.